September 17th, 2015. David's unable to be here tonight, and Nellie is also not able to be here, so we missed them. We have we have 3 people, which is a quorum out of 5 board members to conduct business, so we're going to move forward. The first item I would call to order is the approval of the agenda. That's the public comment, and then the minutes, and then the ordinance review, property maintenance, financial report, water project, reports, water and sewer, old business, new business, board of trustees, comments, and adjournment. Are there any corrections or additions to the agenda? Hearing none, we'll approve the agenda. Yeah, we probably do have to make a motion, I suppose. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I make a motion to approve the agenda.
Aletha moves. Lori seconds the motion to approve the agenda. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? No. Motion approved. The agenda is approved. Public comment. Welcome. Glad to see you all here. Is there anything you'd like to address?
Could we comment later, by any chance?
Sure.
All right, thank
That's
you.
what we usually do. Okay. You mean on a specific agenda item?
No, I just mean, I'm not ready for public comment just this minute.
Well, it's always the first thing on our list.
I know. That's
So,
why I just put in the request that we could have it at the...
I thought you meant on the other agenda. Okay.
No.
We'll do that, but let's not make that a practice, but that's okay. We'll do it tonight.
Okay.
All right, thanks. Sure. Anyone else? Lucille, nice to have you here. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
So the minutes of the last meeting, the August 20th minutes, have been distributed. I think the board members got them ahead of time. Did you see any corrections for the board minutes?
No.
Did you see anything in the board minutes? Okay. So is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I make a motion to approve the last meeting's minutes.
I second it.
Lori made the motion. Aletha seconded it. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion approved. Lori, is that the Martinez copy? Did Lori sign it?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm trying to see if I need to sign these quotes. Okay. Ordinance review, property maintenance, 47 through 49. Did you need something back?
The sign up.
Okay, they're all signed. Okay, thanks. Hi, welcome. Come right in.
Okay, the last meeting, it was, there was quite a bit of discussion about the property maintenance, and I was asked, what would you replace it with? Do you have something to suggest as something different? And so I do have something that I would like to run by the board and present to them as a alternative. And as soon as I can find it.
Okay.
There's one for you, Madam Secretary.
Thank you. Thank you.
I would like to propose that we change the property maintenance
Do you want to make copies for the apartments of those?
to
That for the people in the, oh, sure. Thank you. Okay.
that we change it to read an ordinance governing the maintenance of property of the village of Jameson as specified. Now, I am not sure exactly what the village of Jameson owns, but to change the wording instead of the property in Jameson, to change it to the property of Jameson, which I feel that the board certainly does have control over and expectations for the rest of the community of this property. In changing the word from of to of from in, it relieves the pressure of a personal property, so that the board doesn't have the say over the people's personal property. Now, I would need your expertise or your input as to what it is. It just gives an example there of the park, the right-of-ways, the alleys, ditch banks. I don't know about the fire station, whether the board, the village owns that, or whether they own the, I have heard you mention the park, so you would have to tell me what else does the village own. Does anybody know?
Well, we own the streets and the alleys, and then we actually own some physical property, including the piece across from your house and across from the Christian church where the, what do we call that? We call it City Hall, the old City Hall is what we call it.
Okay.
And then the old fire station,
The old part,
which is
not the new.
right, which is the one just over the hill that's buried into the hill.
And then,
The fire protection district owns the fire building, fire
okay, and how about the fire pit? Or the bus-
burn piles,
Yeah.
burn pile,
Well, that belongs to,
808.
no,
Oh.
to,
The village.
what happened last night?
Community betterment, okay.
That
Oh,
belongs
you're
to
right,
them.
community betterment.
Oh,
That's right. That's
Okay,
right.
they own it?
Okay. And then,
They bought it? They
and
bought the
then,
park.
They bought it.
and the lagoons we own.
Oh,
Yes.
the lagoons.
And the lift station.
The lift stations,
To,
we currently own the vault, with Dodge, no, we don't own it, we have a right of way on it, so he's not.
The lagoons, the vault, and what else?
Not the vault, I take back the vault. Take back the vault, sorry.
Okay, so those are just examples of it, and we can pin that down later.
Okay,
It says such ordinance will prohibit any public nuisance upon such property, be it ordained by the board of trustees of the village of Jameson, Missouri as follows. Section 1, the duty to maintain village right-of-way, ditches, alleys, and then we list the rest of the property that's there. And then section 1 would be changed. Now, do you want me to go through what would be eliminated, or
yeah, can you hand out the ones you got copies?
Yeah, I just got one.
Okay.
how would you?
So the question is whether we might just go through this the way that you have it, is that what you're saying?
Well, this isn't the proposal, and that's what I felt like I was asking you. You were asking me for a substitution. How would it? So this is how I guess we'd like to see it written.
Okay.
It does eliminate things out of the current ordinance, such as changing the word "hog" to "within," deleting the premises of such property. It deletes that, and it also deletes related matters. And then it also eliminates. Okay, now, under section 1. Now, I don't know if you want to deal with the whole thing, or you want to deal with this first, the definition of property maintenance, and then go into section 1, the change that would take place in section 1, the change in section 2. I limited this to 1, 2, and 3 sections, because I feel like,
Okay, and I don't see a 3, is it?
well, actually, number 3 was right there at the very bottom.
Eyesore, eliminate, personal,
Right. Just
just
eliminate
those
that.
4 words.
Yeah, eliminate.
Okay. Well, just in reading this while you were talking, kind of scanning, it seems to me that let's read all 3 and then we may take them one at a time, because I think 2, there's a comment related to 2 that I want to make about 1.
Sure, okay.
So if you would go
That's
ahead
fine. Okay.
with 2, please.
Okay, well, section 1, it would be the duty to maintain village right
Right.
of way, ditches, alleys, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? It shall be the duty of every person owning, leasing, occupying, or having charge of any premises in the village to maintain any right-of-way, ditch, alley, et cetera, adjacent to such premise in accordance with the provision of this ordinance. Be kept and maintained in any manner so as causing to keep or permit any nuisance thereon.
Okay, and so when you say in accordance with provision of this ordinance, the provision of this ordinance then is what follows the semicolon there, is that right? Be kept and maintained.
So I did.
Okay, all
Okay,
right.
and then section 2 is a declaration of what a nuisance is. And this is where, as I said on the paper, this is where abandoned homes were addressed, because that was one of the issues that was brought up appropriately, because they have to be dealt with. Any violation of any provision of this ordinance and property abandoned by homeowners who refuse to take care of or provide for the maintenance and the upkeep of said property so as to prevent health hazards of harboring rats and other vermin, overgrown yards, ditch banks, etc., hereby declare a public nuisance and is subject to abatement and prosecution accordingly. And that would be added in place of number 2. And then eliminate number 3, which is, well, it goes on and then describes in section 3 for the definitions, alley, debris, and eliminate the eyesore one, because that's a personal preference. What's an eyesore to one person isn't necessarily somebody else.
Although what you've described in number 2 makes it be an eyesore, right? You're defining an eyesore or a nuisance, even though you're not calling it that, correct?
So you don't need 3.
Health hazards, harboring vermin, overgrown yards, ditches, I mean,
That's possible.
so it's in contradiction of what, so what I understand that you're proposing is that it be only the property of Jameson and not the property in Jameson, except the property in Jameson, which you're defining as being abandoned.
No.
So people who have property that's been abandoned, which isn't really defined, or who refuse to take care of, but we're not saying not abandoned property who also refuse to take care of the maintenance and upkeep and health hazards and overgrown yards and ditches and public nuisance. Are you including those?
I'm sorry. So you're asking your question.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm not very.
That's okay. This is tough.
So number 2, where it gives this definition of abandoned, and what can be done. If there are properties in town that are not abandoned, which I guess is another way of saying it's not being resided in by abandoned, is what you mean, someone's an absentee landowner. But if there are people who are living in properties in town who are not doing those things too, who are allowing health hazards, vermin, overgrown yards, this doesn't apply to them.
Yes, it does.
No.
Excuse me, I'm talking to my board member a minute here.
Excuse me, I was commenting.
Okay,
No, it doesn't apply to them.
right. So talk about a double standard, right? Isn't that what we have?
Can we
Isn't
make
it
a
some-
comment or ask a
No,
question?
just a minute, let's let the board have the discussion and we'll open it up.
Oh,
And I know Julie's ahead of you, so, but we want to hear from you, we just want to make sure that the board's all on the same page before we, I mean, understanding wise, not on the word read.
Well, actually, I don't really think we need to, because I think that one of the questions, I mean, this was to appease the abandoned homes.
Yeah,
I really don't, and my personal view of this is if you have an abandoned home or the people don't care about the property, the board still has recourse with that person, the ownership, under the alleyways, the right-of-ways, if they're not keeping that. Now, if they want to come into town and just mow their right-of-way, keep the alley, okay, fine, and neglect their property to where it's a hazard, a health hazard, you still have, if they're not going to do anything, then you do have a recourse, that you do have some key in the ordinance to address their neglect.
so I'm understanding section 1 to be only on town-owned, village-owned property,
Right.
nothing else. But number 2 to include individual-owned property, not only.
Yeah, abandoned
So
property.
it does
I don't see it as
contradict.
a double standard.
It is just two completely different things.
Well, that's what I see as two different things.
So she could pick apart.
I was trying to find out what it said, that the board was supposed to, what our responsibility was, and it was talking about that we were supposed to see that people's rights were not. Where is it that it says what our responsibility is on the board?
It's right there.
I know it's in here someplace, I just read it, I can't find it.
Okay. Isn't that right here?
I have this section.
Yeah, that's section one, property maintenance, right? So there it is, so there's the term.
Where it says what we are,
Section one is the, it's to maintain.
and we are supposed to, where is it now? What we are supposed, the town board responsibility is what we are supposed to do. What our responsibility is to the community, to,
Well, not in this particular.
that's not what I want.
Okay.
But it does say two different things completely.
Number one and number two say two different things. One is addressing what the ordinances are going to be enforced
Leasing,
upon.
occupying, and having charge of, maintaining any right of way, HOA.
This is what,
Where is this? Is this what you're looking for, Lisa? Here, close of office, do we,
I don't know if that's, I don't know if that's the part you're looking for, and maybe on the next page.
yes, yeah, that's good.
I can't find the one I'm talking about.
It was just a clarification. Just think that they were saying two different things. I think they have to say two different things, not to say the same.
Anyway, it has to do with the health and the welfare of the community, and if anything, I don't know, it just is too vague to me, and I can't understand it. I just think that if we go ahead and go through these maintenance, the property maintenance things, and see how this applies to it, and mark it off where we need to add something else.
Well,
And
this,
then let the
this
panel take care, the review panel take care of it. If any questions are brought up about they are not doing what they're supposed to, or anybody has any complaints, that they get to the panel and they will negotiate, whatever you want to call it, help them understand what they need to do and reasons why they think they shouldn't have to do it, and come up with some solutions and to work it out, and then come back and say, this is what we've decided, and bring it to the board, and then we make a decision. But this doesn't cover enough, not anywhere.
Right, it doesn't cover this much, but let's listen to let's see what folks in the audience want to say, and then maybe stimulate some more thought.
You said you had a question about number two. That's why you wanted to read it? You did ask me a question.
I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Thanks.
Gotcha. Okay.
Julie, I think you were first, and then I think Mary, and then you were next, so.
I just wanted to know the road in front of my house, you know, the one that's right there, that runs along
Just
down
outside.
In that first street?
Yeah.
It is for sure.
Who owns that road?
It's in town, it's in the city limits, so it's a town road,
Okay.
village, whatever you want to call it, the Jameson Road.
That's my only question for
Okay.
you.
All right, Mary?
It was just a point of clarification there because, you're talking about what you thought that meant, and I wanted to know, what this is basically saying is that we're not doing away with the ordinance, we're just changing it instead of from within the town that's anything that is Jameson, and so we'll still be maintaining our ditch banks and our right away and our whatever, all of that. And if we don't, we can be fined because that's the ordinance. That's what I got out of that one. And then second one, where it defines nuisance, I don't think that I like what you said about this, because what I put in there was when it says reasonable person on eyesore offensive to the sight of a reasonable person, then I want to say, well, who defines who a reasonable person is? Am I reasonable? Am I not reasonable? Are you reasonable? So that's why I didn't like that, because it doesn't define, it doesn't clarify. So what I wonder is, am I understanding this position then? And you're saying it's taking care of the abandonment, because if this guy doesn't mow his lawn, but still it's everybody. I mean, the parkway, whatever our obligation is in town, the alley, keep the debris out of that, right? I mean, am I understanding that correct?
But it's not the same thing as saying that someone who doesn't live here has to mow their grass, in addition to keeping the alley and the roadway and the easement and all that. The people who live in town don't have to mow their grass, or they can harbor rats and they can have overgrown yards, because the second section 2 has that only addressing abandoned property owners.
The health hazards of abandoned property. Well, the only thing I thought was that's what we were talking about, the abandoned property being because it's an eyesore, somebody's not mowing and everything grows up, but is it actually a hazard or a nuisance? And, I guess if anybody else in town and you're reporting people, if there's a hazard on somebody's yard, you can do that same thing we talked about. Talk to your neighbor and tell them there's a hazard there. But I don't know, I just didn't understand. So this is only abandoned property? Is that,
Section 2, yes.
Is that a question?
It would replace the Section 2 in the current ordinances.
Okay.
Is it there?
Because I misunderstood, because when you said, if they choose to come out and mow the street, but they don't mow their yard, then I was thinking you were saying that then they would be penalized for what's going on in the yard. And probably
Yes,
somebody
that would be what I'm proposing, that they would not be penalized for what's going on in their yard. Now, we're
If they
talking
live
about
here.
a person who
No,
lives here. Right. We're not talking about abandoned.
What about abandoned people that don't live there?
So there are two different issues. I agree with Alita. There are two different issues. The people who live here and the people who have abandoned
Because
property.
I thought you were saying likely you could just get them on this ordinance and not have to do
Yes,
anything.
I think you do give teeth to the abandoned properties, because if they are not taking care of the lawn, if they're not
Street.
taking their property, they have to take care of the right-of-ways.
Right, so you get them on that.
So that it does
technicality.
give some teeth to these abandoned people who don't care about their properties and are out of town, and we don't care what happens. We have to say, you better care about your right-of-ways.
Because I thought that was the objection of the last meeting was, well, what about these out-of-town property owners? Those are the people that we're going after. So here's a provision, if I understand it correctly, that would go after the out-of-town property owners without violating the property rights of those people who live here.
Exactly, thank you.
And so I think that kind of satisfies the objections that were made in the last meeting about not being able to go after out-of-town people.
It's because you have to treat people the same. You can't just say, because you don't live here, we can enforce things on you when you're a property owner, just like people who live here are property owners. You can't, I can't cite you tonight case law where that's been
So
settled,
are you
but
saying that it's against case law for Mary to be held to one standard with her pasture and me to be held to one standard with my yard?
Depends how it's defined.
Well, that's all this is doing, is defining it.
Well, but this is defining the real property. It's not defining pasture, and it's not defining
That is
the other
So
property.
why would we have
It's
to
all the
have
same thing.
Why would we have to have their property? Why couldn't it just be the street? And if they don't take care of the street, then you can actually, fine them and take care of it, like you said, give them a bill or something. Because that's the ordinance.
That is what's being proposed. I don't believe that's been the desire of the board thus far. I think we're looking for a uniform community system of making improvements or requiring the people to care for their property. Before, and this person actually wanted to speak before folks jumped in, so.
Well, I just wanted to say that whether it's my property or not, I would think that it's my choice to do with what I want with it. So when if somebody were to come to me and say, you have abandoned your property, I wouldn't call it, I mean, maybe I would call it abandoned, but I would think that was my personal choice, my constitutional choice. So it just shakes me a little bit that someone would, even if I left it there 10 years from now, just because I want to invest in that land, I don't understand why I would have to do anything on it if it doesn't affect public property. That's all.
Well, it's a matter of whether the board chooses to establish a community standard. And then the standard is whether you live here or you don't live here. The standard is the equivalent. But I understand what you're saying, that that's a decision that this group gets to make, and that's sort of the definition of the difference. I want to be able to do anything or nothing with my property. I want to have a pristine property, or I don't want to do anything with it. And yet, within the community, the board has been elected, has the opportunity to pass ordinances that create some baseline minimum.
Is there a dispute process if you do get fined that you can argue against?
Right? And I know Lincoln wanted to talk about this. Our ordinances have a complaint panel provision, which is 3 people. I don't know if you're looking at it or not, but yeah, that's what it says. And so then if there's a written complaint that I live in town and I write a complaint and turn it into the panel and say, I think their grass is too tall, or I think their whatever, the sewer is running out on the ground, then the complaint panels will say, well, if this is true, that indeed is a violation of the ordinances, we need to talk to that property owner. So we talk to the property owner, and if the property owner says, well, I can do whatever I want, blah, 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 and I'm not going to work with you, that's one thing. The other thing is that they can say, I didn't realize that, and the complaint panel says, well, how can we help you? You need equipment, you need expertise, you need, labor, and can we help you get in compliance by doing that? And if you say, no, it's just too much hassle, I'm not going to do it, well, then the complaint panel reports back to this board, you're not wanting to do it, and so then the owner has an opportunity to come to the full board and state their case and have the discussion again. And if the board takes action that says, no, you gotta be in compliance, you get refused, then it could be, well, I think as Natalie said here, it could be, maybe it didn't print out, but printed out on something else I had. Can take the process as is already in our ordinances right now.
Abated, as it says there.
Abated, thanks for the word.
Abatement of prosecution court.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm sorry, excuse me just 1 second. I'm new, so may I have your name, please?
For minutes, you're here. Is that
It's Sarah.
Sarah?
Sarah.
Sarah Cutler.
Okay, thank you.
Allison?
Do I understand if, let's say, a property owner is maintaining their yard sufficiently that they're not endangering somebody, they're not attracting snakes, and because the grass isn't, they're at least maintaining it enough that it's not an attractive nuisance or a danger in the community, and yet it's not aesthetically maybe up to par with what the board wants. Does this mean that the board can essentially seize 51% vote over what the property owner does with their property and when?
I don't know what you mean by 51% vote, but I'll tackle the first
More
part.
control than the actual owner, the person who paid for the property and is paying the property taxes, who has the most control. It sounds almost like the board does. As long as, it's one thing if somebody's, affecting other people's rights by, creating a danger in the community or something. But it's another thing, as long as they're not violating anybody's rights and they're innocent, and that